Like I said, every time I talk to him, I get excited and terrified all at the same time, which is what we should be right now, right? We are going to keep talking about how California is changing with our final panel of the day. David Lesher is the guy who, with a couple other people, made CalMatters happen in the first place, almost 9 years ago now. Bringing the idea of creating CalMatters, creating a news organization that would cover California in the way that it wasn't being covered. Started with 6 people. We are now at almost 90. Dave is now running that digital democracy program you saw earlier, and he's going to lead a conversation with Secretary Julian Castro and Mike Madrid about that changing electorate in California. So, Dave, come on up.
Thank you, everybody. I am really looking forward to this conversation and really happy to be here at the CalMatters Ideas Festival. I mean, if I could go on forever about it. You know, the CalMatters story, it's been remarkable, and this event is really something that we're proud of. But, you know, I've been covering California politics for about 35 years, and this conversation is so important because really all that time, you know, the shape of the Latino electorate has really been one of the most profound parts of, you know, California politics in the last 35 years. And I'm really happy that we have, I really think, 2 of the best people in the country to talk about this topic. I mean, I'll introduce them in a minute, but, you know, when you hear what they've done, I mean, they're the perfect people to talk about this. So get ready for a great education about what's happening. You know, a couple of quick points I wanted to make, kind of just for context about the things we'll be talking about, just to get started. 3 things, and I think of them as kind of a past, present, and future kind of look at where we are. One is a past. This is the 30th anniversary of Proposition 187, which is pretty remarkable since it was really kind of the earthquake that kind of shaped the way California Latino politics has been for the last 30 years. And so really interested in kind of looking at where we are because of that. You know, I'll tell you one thing. Today there are 37 Latino legislators in the California legislature across the street. You know, there were about 5 or 6 in 1994 when that passed. And so, you know, that it has contributed to that kind of a change in the state legislature for sure, but other things as well. The second thing is just a quick snapshot about where we are, you know, just kind of size-wise. And, you know, the Latino population in California is about 39% of the population. And, you know, Mike is a data geek here, so he might catch me on some stats. But PPIC, the Public Policy Institute of California, says that the size of the Latino electorate is about 25% of the electorate right now. And yet the white part of the electorate is about 51%, even though it's a smaller share of the overall population. So just a snapshot of where the Latino electorate is right now. And then the third part, the kind of looking ahead, is something that there's been some chatter about in just the last couple of years about whether there is a right shift in the Latino electorate, or, you know, are things evolving with more of a migration to Republican side. There's a lot of tea leaf reading going on, but anyway, I just want to do that quick past, present, future kind of look at the shape of the California Latino electorate, and then get to our introductions, and so you can see why I'm so excited about this conversation. Mike Madrid is a principal consultant at Grassroots Lab, a prominent political consulting firm. He is a top expert on Latino politics. I think it was your dissertation at Georgetown, right?
100 years ago.
He's the former political director of the California Republican Party. And he was, I'm sure most of you, or if not all of you, have heard of the Lincoln Project. It was a major Republican effort to block the Trump candidacy in 2020, and Mike was a co-founder of that effort. He has a weekly podcast called The Latino Vote, so perfect for this discussion, and co-hosted with your co-host was the Bernie Sanders.
Chuck Rocha from the Bernie Sanders campaign. Yep.
Yeah, former Sanders campaign manager. And then the one thing that I would recommend, Mike has a new book coming out next week, right?
June 18th.
June 18th. I got an early copy and I read it over the weekend. It's called The Latino Century: How America's Largest Minority is Transforming Democracy. So if you're interested in this issue, I recommend it highly because, I found both scholarly research, there's a lot of data, like I said, Mike is in all the nicest way a data geek. There's a lot of research in there, a lot of his long experience and perspective, and then one other thing, Mike is very frank and blunt and candid, which helps the book. But
it's very diplomatic.
And Julian Castro, just this January, became president of the Latino Community Foundation, based in Fresno, right? But
San Francisco.
Oh, really? Okay. It has a mission to increase political participation of Latino voters. So perfect for this conversation. But, Julian's, life and career is really based in Texas, where he was born and raised and started his political career after a political science degree at Stanford and a law degree at Harvard. So not surprisingly, he has a lot of youngest credits to his accomplishments. He was the youngest city council member in San Antonio at 26. When he was mayor of San Antonio, he was the youngest mayor of the top 50 cities in America. In 2012, he kind of leaped to national attention as giving the keynote speech at the Democratic National Convention. President Obama then made him the youngest member of his cabinet, the Secretary for Housing and Urban Development. In 2016, he was widely discussed as a possible running mate with Hillary Clinton, and then he ran for president in 2020. So Julian also turns 50 this year.
50 this year, yeah.
So, his days as the youngest might be over.
That's
but,
it. They are over. And the gray hair is here.
At least you have hair. Just stick with that.
All right, we're off to a good start. Well, I think you're the youngest on this panel, so we'll give you that.
It's still there.
I still got that.
Still got it.
So I just wanted to start with this kind of look back, and part of the legacy of Prop 187, like I said, I assume everybody knows what it is, but it was a measure to deny access to public benefits for undocumented in California. And it won 60-40, so it had a lot of momentum behind it, and it really did change the electorate in a lot of ways, and I'm interested how you think. And then also, I was actually at the LA Times in 1994 covering that campaign, and I was in Texas for the Border State Governors Conference. And I was there with Pete Wilson, who was in favor of 187, obviously, and George Bush was against it when he was governor of Texas. And it just was striking how the Latino politics in Texas were very different than what was happening in California. And so looking back at the last 30 years, kind of how have things evolved and how are they different in Texas and California and the US? And Julian, could you start?
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for having us here, and great to be with you, Mike, and to be here in Sacramento and this inaugural Ideas Festival of CalMatters. Congratulations on y'all pulling it together. I was a student at Stanford University with my brother Joaquin in 1994 when Proposition 187 was on the ballot. And so even though I didn't grow up in California, I was here at the time. And I remember the ads that they ran with the grainy footage that said, "They keep coming." At least my sense was that it felt like a real affront to the Latino community, even though, as you suggested, by the numbers of representatives or elected officials in the state capitol, even the power of the Latino vote and the power of Latino elected officials was not in 1994 what it is in 2024 in California. I think that represented a turning point, as many have said, here in California. Also, at the time, I think it was harder to understand or to see because that was a relatively conservative voting year. It was Clinton's first midterm. Republicans took control of the House. I think that the Speaker lost his election. I want to say Tom Foley lost, which is like an earthquake in politics. In Texas, George Bush beat Ann Richards to become new governor of Texas with all of those politics that you talked about and kind of the opposite of Pete Wilson. But it was a very Republican year. This was after 2 years earlier, California had actually gone Democratic for the first time in a while, after the Reagan years and after Bush in '88. And so, sometimes, folks think about the history and think, oh, how did it turn so quickly? I think the turnaround had started before then. And it was hard to see in '94, but that contributed to, I think, much deeper organizing and energy and passion in the community that helped ultimately to turn California around. And I think that along the way, it mobilized. It's been amazing. I've been in this job now for about 6 months. And talking to organizers out there, some of them that were around in 1994, a lot of them that weren't born, as Mike pointed out in a phone call a couple of days ago in 1994. But folks who used Prop 187 as sort of a marker of, I think, what we don't want to go back to in California. And it certainly provided a lot of energy to organize, to mobilize, to make things different in the state. I think in Texas, weirdly enough, in some ways, when it comes to that, we've gone in the opposite direction from a governor that was saying that family values don't stop at the Rio Grande, and Bush, who maybe it was right after he left, Rick Perry signed the Texas Dream Act back then to extend in-state tuition to Latina and Latino young people at the University of Texas and all of the Texas higher educational systems, to now Greg Abbott busing migrants, to other states, and SB 4, which is the equivalent kind of SB 1070 that Jan Brewer did in Arizona in 2010. And so I think it's fair to say that over the years, these immigration politics have been a lightning rod. They have helped organize, they've helped mobilize the community. I think what's different about this year, or these times, is what's interesting is that you're not talking about a community that has been here a long time. Think about when you're talking about dreamers and their parents, you're talking about folks who have roots in the community, who have been here 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, whatever number of years, who have coworkers, who have neighbors, who have friends that are here. The conversation right now on immigration is centered very specifically at the border of people who are trying to come right now. That means that's a very disempowered group. That's not the Latinos and Latinas that have been here for 20 years, 25 years. And I think that has been underwritten about, under-identified, but explains some of, not all of, but some of the disjuncture here. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that, but I wanted to lead into that to compare then to now.
That's in Mike's book too.
Pre-order now. That's fantastic. That was extraordinarily eloquent summation of 30 years of what got us here. I mean, you're taking me back to some of those memories. I went to school at Georgetown, and probably a little bit older than you, but we were it was odd to be on a university campus when it was getting as explosive as it was. And for the first time, what we saw was a multi-generational voting bloc come together as Latinos. Like, we were under attack. And you saw numbers consolidate. Republican Latinos were like, nope, we're not doing this. Let's rally with the community. It obviously catalyzed a whole generation, certainly here in California, of Alex Padilla, our good friend who's now a U.S. Senator, a myriad of California speakers of the Assembly, and on and on and on. At that time, I was looking to Texas for a different model because you had a George W. Bush and you had a longer-term community where that was inconceivable. Like, what are you doing in California? Like, how is that possible? And the question for about 10 or 15 years was, which way is the Republican Party going to go? Is it going to be the Pete Wilson model, or is it going to be the George W. Bush model in Texas? And the Texans were winning, nationally anyway. And as Mr. Castro just pointed out correctly, that year, that time frame, essentially was the tipping point for both states, where Texas begins this journey to becoming a more Republican state with this optimistic, pluralistic message that George W. Bush is talking about, all people, very welcoming of people from Mexico and other parts of the world. Meanwhile, the Republicans start to collapse here in California with a very isolationist, nativist, angry, ugly message. And so to me, the obvious thing was, well, I mean, if you want to win, if you want to expand, we'll follow the Texas model. I wanted to learn. I started working with a firm in San Antonio to learn and see what they were doing. But then 2016 comes along. And I'm not going to say that there wasn't a road there. Governor Perry, as you'll remember, his political career ended when he was on stage in 2012, I guess it was, saying, if you don't want to, let children who are here undocumented be in the public school systems, you don't have a heart. And he was roundly booed off stage, in a Republican audience. I thought, wow, the Republican Party has just changed. This is not the same party. And it really set in motion, I think, this idea of America's deep insecurities about racial transformation and change, really embodied deeply in the Republican Party. So much so that even today, the Republican Party in California, get this, the Republican Party in California is about 83% white in a state that is 37% white. So if you don't see a racial correlation there, I mean, you're choosing not to see it. That's what it's about. It's about identity politics. And that brings us, again, I'm sure we'll jump into this in a bit, but where that 30-year trajectory now goes, and what has the last 30 years taught us about the extraordinary change that we're on the cusp of? Because I believe, just from a numbers demographic perspective, the next 30 years are going to be far more transformative than even the last 30 were with Latinos.
So just quickly to follow up, I mentioned 25% of the electorate is Latino and 39% of the population. Is that kind of on track where it would be at this point in its evolution, or lagging, or how do you read that benchmark?
Yeah, I mean, I think in many ways it's on track in the sense that it tends to be a younger community. Yep. You also have a community that has a higher number of folks who are not able to vote, right? Yeah. Either undocumented or not able to vote. You have some folks in mixed status families and others who are afraid to vote because there's a hesitancy to interact with anything that is governmental. It's like other communities of color. You've had a lower registration and generally turnout rate in a lot of these elections. And you add all of that up, and my example is San Antonio, where I'm from, that San Antonio for the longest time has been majority Latino. But when I ran for mayor, it was estimated that only about, let's say between 49 and 51% of the voting electorate in the mayoral race was Latino, even though it was like 63%, 64% of the population. And so you had the same over-indexing there of white voters and under-indexing of Latino voters. So I would say it's not unexpected.
Yeah.
I think I would just add that what's different in a place like California versus Texas is the organizing that exists here. There's like a backbone of organizing here in this state, even in places like the Central Valley and other that are not LA, San Francisco, San Diego, that in most parts of Texas just does not exist. Does not exist at all.
Michael, what do you think about that benchmark?
Well, I think it's probably right, at least by historical trends, but it's important to understand a couple of things. The first is we have the lowest voter turnout rate of any of the four largest race or ethnicities. And youth is absolutely a function of that. There's no question. Young people broadly, regardless of your background, vote at lower rates. And we are decidedly younger. Like I'm saying, 40% of Latino voters voted in 2016 or more recently. Like, that is an extraordinary number, and it's a real precursor of what's going to happen this year, in 2 years, in 4 years, and 6 years. And for the rest of the lives of everybody in this room, every presidential election will set a high number of Latino voters, because that's just where the demographics of the country are going. But I've always been perplexed and wanted to look deeper at turnout. And low voter turnout is also a function of poverty. It is the key indicator of a lack of civic engagement broadly. Doesn't matter if you're black in the Deep South, or white in Appalachia, or Latino in East LA. If you're poor, that is the key metric to look at. Wealthy young people actually vote at pretty high rates, okay? So we've got to use poverty as a metric and understand that. And in California, we have some of the lowest economic mobility rates of any state in the country, most states by a wide measure. And then when you add on top of that the lack of housing and the disproportionate ability for Latinos to buy homes, especially those first home buyers that are people under 30, which traditionally has been a first-time home buyer's age, your propensity to vote increases by 3x when you become a homeowner. So we're building a society that is locking in multi-generational poverty for the first time in our 150-year history, but we're also destroying the fabric of our democracy and civic engagement by having absolutely no housing policy and not seeking to address it. So many challenges that we'll get into are a function of the economy and poverty, the lack of economic mobility, where California is actually a really good petri dish, because we have policies that have made those problems far more pronounced than everywhere else, and why the Latino vote is an outlier in California. In the biggest ethnic transformation in the country's history, California is lagging as an indicator. It's behind the rest of the country, and a lot of it has to do with the function of the economy.
Wow. That's perfect. Where I was going next is I wanted to get into some of the issues that are resonating, and to what extent, the economic message is the one to talk about, or and we're hearing a lot about immigration too, and how do those play out. But, something happened this week that we had breaking news, and I'm sorry, we're a news organization. So, on Tuesday, President Biden signed a executive order banning, migrants, what is it? Banning migrants from seeking asylum. That's the word I was looking for. The New York Times called it the most restrictive policy of any modern Democratic president. Our U.S. Senator Alex Padilla came out and said that our President Biden is defying American values. And so, just as we get into issues, that one stuck out because it's pretty significant. We're in the middle of a presidential race. This is, and it's a big issue. So, Mike, I'll start with you. Just your reaction to it. And I don't know where the time has gone, but we got a lot to cover.
Hurry up.
So,
that means Mike, hurry up. One of those short answers. Look, very clearly, this is an absolutely heartbreaking and heart-wrenching policy. And I have worked with Alex Padilla, and I've worked with every Latino politician who's willing to listen for 30 years. It's one of those issues where I'm far to the left of probably most on this policy. But what is most fascinating to me about this debate is the wide spectrum of discourse that is occurring. There's two things. The first is the wide spectrum of disagreement in the Latino caucus, the conference itself, where Ruben Gallego in Arizona has a very different message than what you're hearing from an Alex Padilla. And Luke Correa from Orange County and Norma Torres, very different messages. Salud Carbajal basically supporting it from Santa Barbara. Cuellar from Texas, and Tony Gonzalez. The Latinos are all over the map on this. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But to me, that's at least not on the topic necessarily, but to see finally this break in the unanimity on a key central issue that has been orthodoxy in the community means that a break on many issues is coming, and for that, I'm hopeful. First, I want to say that. The second is, I think it's critically important to understand that Latinos, as I mentioned earlier, in 1994, 2/3 of Latinos were immediately behind against 187. We were the only group that voted against Prop 187. The polling on border security right now, there's very little disagreement between Latinos and the non-Hispanic white population now because of the explosion of third and now a significant measurable fourth generation. And so it makes it harder to build that base, that multi-generational base of support. And that's going to complicate politics for both parties. So as I said, going forward, immigration is not going to be the issue that it was for the past 30 years, and that dramatically changes the calculation for both political parties.
Julian?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that also depends, again, on the substance of the policy. I really believe that one of the reasons that you see the Latino numbers trending more toward, let's say the overall or mainstream numbers on this issue, a couple of reasons. One is I think there was no pushback from President Biden or Democrats on this. They basically have allowed the Overton window to move to where Trump wanted it to. There was no positive vision on immigration. There was legislation that the president put forward on immigration on the first day and then hasn't spent any political capital on it. Meanwhile, whether it's DeSantis or Abbott or some of these other Republicans, they've been demagoguing on this issue the entire way through and creating this impression that there's an invasion at the southern border. They have been very intent on that. And on this issue, again, that's much easier to accomplish with people when you're talking about people literally physically coming in at the border versus people who are your coworkers and your neighbors who have been here for years and years. To me, the question will be, both with Latinos and the general public, when they aim their fire again full-throatedly at the people who have been here, the dreamers, their parents, others, and are cracking down there, going into the factories and trying to deport people the way that Trump says that he will with this deportation force. What is the response from the community going to be then? And I believe that the response is going to be more in line with what we saw during the Trump years and what we saw in California during 187 than it is with the relatively muted response that you have right now to this. And that's unfortunate because, I think that many of these folks who are seeking asylum have legitimate reasons to seek it. There are many who are not, the majority of them will not get granted asylum, even under the rules that we have today, even if they weren't changed, right? Most people don't get granted asylum. But I think that, and I said this to some reporter a couple days ago, I think it's a mistake. I think that in 10, 20, 30 years that we're going to look back on this changing of the asylum system like this as a mistake. And I think that it affirms the Trump blueprint on immigration, the narrative that has been set in place. And the open question is, and clearly the administration thinks, and some Democrats believe, that this is going to help in November, that they had to do something now to show that they're trying to address the number of people trying to come to the United States and all of these images that people see. And do I get the politics of that? Sure. I also believe that they were bullied into a corner into doing that. And so now you're having to scramble a few months before an election to address it. And I believe that that substantively the policy probably is never going to go into effect, that it's going to be struck down legally. Some of this stuff Trump tried to do, and it was struck down. The ACLU has already said they're going to file a lawsuit. So politically, who knows what role this is even going to play in November.
So I'm going to squish some of my questions into together. But so I want to talk two things I wanted to ask about. One is, like I said, the extent to which there has been a Republican trend within the Latino electorate, and kind of, if you could answer that, kind of spinning towards what we expect to see in 2024 this year in the election. And I raise this, one of the statistics I pulled out of your book, Mike, Obama got 71% of the Latino vote, Hillary Clinton got 66%, and Biden got 59%. As Mike says in the book, 3 is a trend. The Latino Community Foundation did a poll just a couple weeks ago, and it was really interesting in terms of, really jobs, inflation, and housing were the top three issues. But there was exactly where things are going to shake out in the presidential race. There was, on the economy especially, whether Trump or Biden were better. Some of the numbers tilted Trump. And so I'm wondering, as you look ahead to the 2024 election and this kind of trend that has been picked up, what do you think we should? What do you think we'll see in this election? Mike, why don't I start with you?
Well, and again, I think it's important that we understand, we've all heard this narrative that somehow this shift started in 2020. It did not. It's been going on for a long time, okay, at least a decade. The problem is it's been happening by 1 or 2 percentage points. And that's my worry is that realignment, and I'm going to use that word very cautiously because I don't like the word, because I don't believe that a realignment is actually happening. A realignment presupposes that it's a bunch of voters who are here that are changing their voting behavior and now voting with another party. That is not what is happening. What is happening is the emergence of a new voter. These younger voters are voting much more off of economic concerns, as your polling just mentioned. The ethnic identity and the race anchor that immigration served for the past 30 years is no longer working for the fastest growing segment of the Latino electorate. That's what we're seeing. That's what we're watching. And it predates the 2020 immigration crisis. It predates Donald Trump. In fact, a lot of people will ask, what is Donald Trump doing that's attracting all these Latino voters? And my answer is nothing, and here's why. You mentioned Ron DeSantis in Florida, Greg Abbott in Texas, Doug Ducey in Arizona, even Brian Dawley here in California, all have one thing in common. Their support levels with Latinos are at or higher than where Donald Trump has gotten. That's clear data and evidence to suggest that Donald Trump is in the way of a larger shift that would otherwise be happening. If Donald Trump's vulgarity and crassness and racism was not in the way, I think it's very possible you're seeing Latinos in the mid-40s range, maybe higher. And that's what the data on the ground in congressional districts is showing. It's happening in every assembly and Senate congressional district in California. It's happening in most of the major states in the country. We're witnessing the emergence of a new vote. It's not a realignment, and neither party is prepared for what is happening. Neither of them are connecting.
So any description of what the Latino vote will be in a Biden-Trump race in November?
Say that again?
Yeah.
What was it?
I mean, where would the Latino vote go in a Biden-Trump race?
With all that, I'm not going to make a prediction because I can say it can go either mid-40s with Trump or it can go down to the historical range of 27, where you would expect him to be and where he was in 2016. My guess is we probably have a new baseline in the mid to high 30s, which is extraordinary, by the way. At least it is for an old guy like me who's been doing this forever, is once a Republican broke 30, like something strange was going on.
Yeah.
We're seeing this very high level of support, and my worry is somebody who's very concerned about a Trump reelection. There's a lot of dismissal from the Biden campaign specifically and Democrats generally saying, oh, it's not happening, or oh, they'll come back. The reality is this has been going on for a long time. It predates Trump, and it's all demographic. If you follow what's happening with the generational trends, it's following a very predictable pattern of political behavior.
Julian, what do you think about the trend in partisanship in the Latino electorate? Is it evolving, changing in some way, or how would you
I think
interpret
it's fair to say that it's been dynamic. There were years, and if we look at the '84 election, or you look at the 2000 or 2004 election, so Reagan and George W. Bush the first time and the second time, you had these spikes, right, in Latino support for those candidates. So it's been in this range before, but generally has been strongly Democratic. I think that when it comes to young people, though, the Republicans face these real problematic headwinds on reproductive rights, right, on attacking the LGBTQ community, on this basic sense of standing for everybody. And so I think those issues are pretty good buffers against them making too many inroads, so that, as Democrats would think, with young people, that something's going to have to change there before you're going to really make inroads with that crowd. I also think, one of the underwritten about parts of what's happened in my home state of Texas has been that the whites in some of these areas are trending more Democratic, right? Especially in during the Trump era in the suburbs of places like Dallas and Houston, where Colin Allred and Lizzie Fletcher and other folks got elected. And so part of that is kind of balancing out. In fact, I think that is trending Texas more toward Democrats faster right now because the voting base is still larger. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I won't pick a number in terms of the prediction for November, but I mean, I believe that Biden is going to hold the Latino vote. Our polling showed that in Nevada, he was up by 15 points over Trump, and in Arizona, he was up by 20 points. And then here, it was a little bit more than that. So that there was still a lead, but there's still 5 months left until the election, which is like 100 lifetimes in politics these days. So we'll see what happens with it.
So I wanted to end here kind of looking ahead and a little bit of a crystal ball, but also, some kind of path or guidance you would suggest for, kind of for both parties, but what's the message that resonates most with Latino voters that either is or is not being heard? And as the electorate matures, what does America look like? I mean, one of the things that I thought was striking was in your book, Mike, you talk about women, Latino women, being in a big gender gap among Latino voters. And when we look at the California legislature, of the 37 Latinos, 24 are women. And we just had the first woman elected a president of Mexico on Monday. So as we look forward, and we look at the electorate maturing or evolving, continuing to evolve, how do the parties, reach out with the best message, and how does the future shape America? How does the Latino vote and electorate continue to shape America to what it'll be next? So, Julian, why don't I start with you?
Yeah, no, I gave a convention speech once on this, so I'll borrow from that. No, but I think of the community still as a very aspirational community. Like at the Latino Community Foundation, one of the things we focus on is entrepreneurialism, for instance, and Latinas have one of the fastest rates of starting businesses and growing those businesses. It's a community that cares deeply about education and ensuring that children can get a good education, healthcare, all of those issues that every community does, but with an immigrant sense of urgency about it, of trying to move forward and accomplish and really to live up to the American dream with all of its complications and sort of sometimes false promises and what it means today and so forth, and sometimes the superficiality of that. But basically, I think the message has to center around an aspirational message. And that's what I think that the Trump era has muddied up for both parties in a way, directly for Republicans, because they're just engaged in this, like, who can be nastier to which vulnerable group approach, whether it's the LGBTQ community or women or recent migrants. And Democrats have allowed themselves to be pulled into the mud too oftentimes on some of this stuff. And so you don't have the same vision and aspiration and sort of appeal. I think that's what it's going to take, really, to get folks motivated and something that connects to their daily lives, something that's focused on their upward mobility.
Yeah,
great. Thank you, Mike.
Well, I'm not allowed at my convention anymore, so. The single largest demarcation in American politics today is what we call the education divide. If you have a college degree, your propensity and your likelihood to be a Democrat goes up considerably. If you do not, it equally goes as fast towards the Republican Party. That is the largest demarcation. When I was younger, it used to be income. You could always talk about tax cuts and economic stuff to Republicans and bring them home. That's no longer the case. That's important because our Latinas are going to college at a much higher rate than our men are. And that is manifesting in a gender gap that is larger amongst Latinos than it is for any other race or ethnic group in the country. And that's going to have extraordinary ramifications on American culture and American ideas and beliefs in itself as we go forward. Women are not only going to be in office more than men are, I believe that firmly. They are going to be in corporate boardrooms, in the C-suite. They'll be the heads of media companies and foundations and all of that. And that is going to change the perspective of the way we view ourselves as Americans, not just as Latinos. With that in mind, the answer to the question about which party is going to dominate the next generation or who we are as Americans comes down to which party can articulate to a multi-ethnic, aspirational, working class community their vision of what tomorrow looks like. And Julian was exactly right. The Republicans have a real problem with the multi-ethnic part of that. A lot of this shift, as I'm saying, is happening despite Republicans' efforts, not because of them. I don't believe they're moving towards the Republicans. I believe they're moving away from Democrats. That's foundationally different. But the reason why is Democrats have a real problem with the working class piece. That's not Mike Madrid saying that. That's not the Republicans saying that. That's Latinos and working class people saying that. They are moving away from the Democratic Party. And you've got to understand that change in the party's coalitions to understand why America is at where it's at right now. And I'll wrap it up by saying this. The aspirational piece is absolutely right. There's a lot of fear and consternation and anxiety about the basic guardrails of democracy at this moment in time for very good reason. But the answer is not electoral college reform. It is not popular election reform. It is not campaign finance reform. The answer is we've got to fix our culture. And why I am so optimistic about where we're at this moment in time is every day 10,000 Latinos turn 18 and they have a demonstrably more optimistic view of America and the American idea. They have measurably higher confidence and trust in our social institutions, whether it's higher education or the media or government or the military or churches, all of those things that are required to make democracy work. Latinos are providing the perspective, the belief, and I think the blended culture that makes all of this continue, this American idea continue. So that's why I called the book The Latino Century, and that, I think, is why I'm so optimistic about this moment in time when so many other people are not.
I love the great way to end this. These two guys are going to follow up on stage again next week, and Mike gets to interview Julian.
Now I know the tough questions to ask.
So there will be a sequel, but please really give a round of applause to these great speakers.